So it's another wild and crazy day on this March 14th, 2022 at approximately 1 p.m. I'm channeling my inner St. Patrick's Day a few days early, as you can tell by my green and my cap, and incidentally my name, Patrick Stewart Lovell. And I'm bringing you truth bombs like I do each and every day, and this is getting wild, people. We just blasted through 600,000 views. I think we're approaching 1 million views on the con. Like I always say at the very beginning, we've got to translate this, and we're starting to see a spike over on YouTube. But please go to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. Please like and subscribe, and that way we can ensure that these messages can continue to grow and get to the people that need to hear them the most. In the event, for some reason, I get shut down for forces that I can't foresee, which I'm definitely pulling the tail of the lion and the dragon and poking the bear and all of that other kind of stuff, because that's what I do, because I'm not afraid of injustice. In fact, it pisses me off so bad. Injustice should be afraid of me, especially if I got millions of you by my side, and that's what I'm trying to stimulate, because we're trying to create, and I'm going to mix a couple of different references, man. We're at the shores of the, I should say biblical references, but we're at the shores of the Red Sea, man. It's right about that time in spring where we can always have deliverance. And that's what it's always been about from the very beginning of dawn and time and nature and the rest of it. But in this particular metaphor, we're at the shores of the Red Sea and the waters are about to part. We can get through this in the great exodus to liberty and justice for all through the great resurrection. So let's start hashtagging hashtag Exodus, and let's hashtag the resurrection in addition to hashtag the con and hashtag Patrick Lovell. And for you newcomers, listen, this is all about the truth on a platinum platter that nobody in power wants us to understand. And this goes for people around the world, because we're all under the thumb of corruption. You can find the answers at www.thecon.tv. It's available for $2 an episode on Apple TV, on Amazon Prime, on Vimeo, and on Microsoft, but it's also for free on, if you go to the library, get a library card and download a platform called Hoopla. You can watch it for free there with limited commercial interruptions. So that's enough of the business and the promotions, because I got to bring this to the task at hand. Again, it's another wild day. Let me try to paint the picture of why the con is always at the intersection of everything. I'm going to give you a couple of different examples of what I actually came across this morning. So first and foremost, one of my favorite guys I like to watch is a guy by the name of Russell Brand. He's a comedian. He's this English chap. He's also a celebrity in the United States, very charismatic, incredible verbal skill, and he's always trying to unpack corruption because he's trying to create the Great Awakening. Now, ironically, I've been putting the con in front of his team and his gatekeepers for some time, and they continue to ignore it. Not sure what that's all about. I suppose it's like you got to have, sort of an end with a guy like Russell Brand for him to tactically take you serious, because he's got his 5 million viewers that he's trying to pontificate what he calls the Great Awakening. But you can't do that, Russell, unless you have the facts of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history, which is what I'm trying to get to you, and I'm allied with you, and hopefully one day we can actually connect. Same goes for Jon Stewart. I've been definitely sending messages to Jon Stewart nonstop, because Jon Stewart is asking all the right questions. He's a bright guy. But again, he talks like he actually understands what's going on with corruption, and he doesn't. He doesn't know what created the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, and he doesn't understand how it actually never ended, and he doesn't understand when he's sitting in front of the guys that created it, like Jamie Dimon, what questions to ask, or Janet Yellen, or others that actually were involved with making us move past it and cover it up. He just didn't understand what's going on, and I don't fault him for that. He's a comedian. He's not an investigative journalist. He's a guy that's got resources gazillions of light years ahead of where I am, but I got a lot of tenacity, if you haven't figured it out by now, and that's why I've got 600,000 views so far that are translating to people asking me, what are we going to do about this? But you got to wrap your head around corruption first. So in Sandbox 1 today, Russell Brand is talking about, again, corruption, but he's talking about, and actually very intelligently, about Russian oligarchs and manifesting the actually extracting wealth out of Russia, moving into Western markets through real estate and assets and everything else. But it gets complicated because of supposedly President Biden is all about these sanctions that are basically waging war on behalf of NATO and the West against Russia's insurgency into the Ukraine for all the humanistic and all of the other sorts of reasons. But the reality is, and what Russell Brand, paints very clearly, is that Wall Street and our corporations don't want to get out of Russia or stop doing business with the oligarchs because they're corrupt, because they put money above quite frankly, principle and the United States of America. One of my continuous messages to you is that our financial system has illegally corrupted and completely hijacked all of the institutions of our power, the separations of our government, to be able to hold that power to account, but they haven't because of what we call corruption and complicity and the revolving door. And so they have absolute immunity. They're above the law, and they've pulled the largest criminal conspiracy in history that's never ended, and we're all on the thumb of it. And they're going to drive us into the ground if we don't find a way to step up and reconstitute life, liberty, and justice for all through the integrity of law. And I know the guys who can actually do that, because Patrick Lovell is a muckraker who spent 13 freaking years getting the truth, putting on a platinum platter for you to freaking understand. And now I have to come to you directly, because the entire system, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, all of them told different pieces of the story, but they never told us the whole story. And they never got to it because maybe they were holding up for the DOJ and the FBI, who covered this up for Wall Street. And that's the corruption that I'm talking about. Now I got to make it the next phase of what happened this morning is, every once in a while I'll check out Tucker Carlson. I am not a fan of Tucker Carlson at all, but I have admired some of the things that he has done in the past on private equity. And every once in a while, and I'll watch to see what, the Fox, spin is and all this stuff, just to see where they're coming from and what they're trying to manipulate. But I think that Tucker Carlson delivered one hell of a truth today, and it's intriguing to see if how many of us can actually read between the lines of what he's saying. So his whole thing was about the sanctions. It was kind of the flip side of what Russell Brand was talking about in terms of, how oligarchs and trillionaires and everybody else led to a situation where they blew up the global economy, and that the Federal Reserve was there to pick it up. He starts telling the truth of the things that I've been trying to lay out for you, but without the details, of course, because that's what guys like Tucker Carlson do. They get paid a whole lot of money to manipulate you instead of tell you the truth, and this is how he did it. So he starts talking about the truth of the Federal Reserve policy that stimulated the economy with trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars digitized into existence into the hands of the bad guys that created this crazy world that we live in. But he used that to basically hyperinflate the framing of what inflation actually is and how it's caused and everything else for an outcome. But his ultimate outcome was the sanctions that that Biden are exercising against Putin, especially as it relates to not purchasing oil. It doesn't affect ultimately the global prices. So when we're not getting Russian oil, that doesn't really affect our market, but because oil is, traded on a global stage, that ultimately when our sanctions, basically cut the supply off from Russia to the Western world and everything else, and that all of this money worldwide is basically traded in dollars, that what we're doing is that we're undercutting the power of the dollar and ultimately leading potentially to the collapse of the dollar. That was his message. And so I'm thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, here's a guy who's basically the right-wing version of, the mouthpiece of the Koch brothers and all of those guys that undergird Fox and everything else that lead to, that got us ultimately into Trump and everything that constitutes, with the white supremacist, Confederate slave owner version of the United States that wants to go back 100 years, because I always compare Tucker Carlson to Leonardo DiCaprio's character into Django. That's what he reminds me of. That's who he is. But he's telling us the truth, because literally, if the petrodollar, basically backstops American currency on a global stage that allows us to have fiat currency, what happens if Putin institutes a run? Primarily, if something backfires, like for example, and I think this was part of the plan, to have Russian oligarchs extract billions of dollars, put it into Western economies that they knew that they would play ball to get them to actually be part and parcel to it, so that if they went down, it would take us down. Because if it takes down the global, the American dollar, or I should say the dollar is the world's reserve currency, then wait a second, what happens if the BRIC countries create an alternative? And why wouldn't they? Why would they want to be completely invested in stuff that they know is corrupt? Because they're corrupt themselves. So really, in the end, you're talking about two corrupt systems that are vying for control, while the rest of us get completely screwed, and we might be on the doorsteps of World War III. And if it's not World War III, it's climate change. And if it's not climate change, it's just corruption, and it's all tied to the same problem. So again, that addresses Russell Brand, that addresses Tucker Carlson, but here was the ultimate give me today, right? So I'm like, I get this message from this cat that I appreciate, but I interact with a lot of Trump supporters sometimes because, we're on the same side in terms of the fraud that has taken place in the courts, but I'll never in a million years get to the point that you can recognize corruption, but then you're going to support a guy like Trump who's corrupt to the gills. But of course, we all talk and everything else. And so this guy sends me this this email, this video that absolutely boggles my mind, but it's something I was aware of. So it showed Glen Beck interviewing these people that are, I think, the principals of title lock. And I first came across this, like, I think back during mid-NFL season, so it must have been around September, where ultimately Newt Gingrich was the spokesperson. So Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, the Republican who created the culture wars in the 90s that really led to the implosion of, in a government serving the people and ultimately led to the corruption that we're dealing with. That guy was, front and center on all of this stuff. And now he's the spokesperson for this product called Title Lock. Title Lock is basically telling seniors out there everything that I've been telling people in the con for a long time. There's all sorts of documentation fabrication known as straw buying that can allow bad actors within financial institutions to work with brokers to literally set elderly people up to steal their homes, and they're none the wiser. That's probably happened in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cases, and it happened to everybody regardless of ideology. In fact, it happened to Addie Polk in the con where she ended up getting evicted and from a home she owed 4 decades, and she ended up turning the gun on herself, shot herself, committed suicide because she didn't want to go homeless because she was set up in this thing that Newt Gingrich is now telling white seniors you got to be careful of. And they basically painstakingly use brokers that lied on documents, and they show the identity theft and all of the things that transpire that bad actors can use in the courts through, quite frankly, something that they're not showing, servicers and foreclosure mills, that judges around the country have been rubber stamping illegal foreclosures in literally millions of cases. Throughout this whole process, I think 1% of the people that were victimized by this situation after the 2008 great financial crisis literally fought back. And a lot of those people went the distance. They went years and years in the courts. They discovered all sorts of documentation fabrication, all sorts of details about who didn't own what in terms of securitization and the notes and, depending states, and a lot of stuff that's very complicated, but at the same time, it's real easy in the end. People can steal people's homes, and they can do it with the courts knowing it and rubber stamping it because the courts are getting paid by somebody. One day I'll go into more detail about what that means. I've got it on tap for what we call season 2 for the con, if I can ever get it off the ground. But the horrific factor of this, that when you look at all of this big picture stuff, we respond honestly and justifiably so to images of women that get shot, that are pregnant at a hospital in Kiev, and all the horrible tragedies and calamities that go along with war. For anybody who's been around, we've seen it, our entire lives. I mean, it's not like we didn't have it the last 20 years in the Middle East, particularly in Pakistan. I mean, I should say Afghanistan, and of course Syria and everything that constitutes. So now, it's Western Europe, and it seems like the conflict never ends, while the bad guys engineering everything from above continue to play the global, the global population through, engineering of this insane corruption. Now it's just a battle between the West and the East, and what sorts it out. We're all going to lose unless we come together to overcome this stuff. So, I guess I could go on and I could talk forever, but I think I've probably introduced enough today. Look, the bottom line is Newt Gingrich, literally, think about this from this construct, and Glen Beck, most importantly. So Glen Beck is acting like he's a good guy in this thing with the title lock that I'm telling you that they show to seniors that there's all sorts of fraud happening in the courts and they can get their house stolen. So instead of, for example, let me start here. Glen Beck is in season 3 of The Con, which we documented where he stood back after the great financial crisis, and he literally mocked the same people he's championing now then, okay? And then he used his extraordinary, angst at that time to galvanize the Tea Party. He was a big part of that. And the Tea Party, of course, was won by Americans for Prosperity, which was basically engineered and financed by the Koch brothers. So, oh, by the way, if you follow the Koch brothers, the Koch brothers, how they made their fortune originally? Like Trump, their dad made a lot of money. Do you know how he made a lot of money? Well, because he created Stalin's Russian oil infrastructure. And he became insanely rich working with the communists. So the ultimate harbingers of libertarianism were basically working with the communists to, make gazillions of money in the oil infrastructure, of which, of course, that they bought a good portion of American, paper products and whole assortment of, huge operations that ultimately they bought political influence. And then they have this incredibly sophisticated education pipeline where they got, they bought into academia, and all of these conservative think tanks. And then ultimately, in this laissez-faire libertarianism that they basically set forth in what's known as Americans' prosperity originally. And all of that stuff was precursors to give us Trump. But what you need to know is Mr. Good Guy to white people, Glen Beck, was basically mocking them back in 2008. So now he's flipped sides. Why? Because he's getting paid for it. And what about Newt Gingrich? Is Newt Gingrich actually taking this information that he knows to his Republican compatriots in Congress so that they could actually reconfigure the law to make sure that corruption doesn't happen in the courts? No, he's just taking a fee for advertising this thing that people are selling, a title rock that's supposedly going to prevent you from getting nailed. And I guess the way it works is Registry of Deeds would, notify people on their home if there's like a strange, fraudulent deed of trust that's submitted in the registry. And I guess, in some ways that's cool, but in some ways it's not, because ultimately at the end of the day, it just reminds me of the whole system. Okay, so it doesn't matter what con artist you follow, right? So I'll tell you what Donald Trump learned a long time ago. He learned it from P.T. Barnum, a sucker's born every minute. Donald Trump's been involved with all sorts of documentation, fabrication, his entire career. He's laundering money for the bad guys. He's working with the communists just like the Koch brothers' dad did, but he doesn't give a shit as long as the money goes into his pocket. He doesn't care if he works with the Saudis who were involved in 9/11. These people have no allegiance to anything. But then, wait a second, are the blue guys the good guys? No. Freaking Obama came in and covered up for Wall Street, madness. And he did it with the same people. He put the same people in charge who created the system. When Obama came in to become president, his entire administration became the people that created the problem so they could clean it up and we could continue on. So like I continue to say, you've got two choices. You literally have corruption is one choice moving forward, or you have white supremacy. Patrick Lovell is truth bombing the whole thing because I believe in liberty and justice for all. I believe in the integrity of justice. I believe in the spirit of Exodus. And more importantly, the integrity of common sense. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not cover that way. Jesus Christ, how hard is it to live an honest life? That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be the Uma Thurman, who gets the adrenaline shot in your chest, waking you up from this comatose that we've all been in, to realize Patrick Lovell's not the enemy, man. Patrick Lovell's the only guy who had the balls to freaking go the distance to let you know what the truth is. And ultimately, it's literally what everybody has covered up or everybody played their role in. Why am I the guy that's doing it? I don't know. But 600,000 more people of you knew about it today than you did a month ago, or 1 million on the other hashtags. Go to go to YouTube. Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. Like and subscribe. Share. Give me your comments. Let's come together. Let's get on the page, same page. Let's organize. And above all else, please, please, please tell everybody you know that ever lost their house to foreclosure, or anybody that you know who might have gone through a divorce, and you might actually say, hey, did you happen to go through a foreclosure? Because if you did and you were hiding it this whole time, you got set up to fail. And this guy, Patrick Lovell, figured it all out. He put it on a platinum platter for us all to figure out because he's trying to save the American dream. He's trying to freaking sucker punch like Popeye, the Blutos of the world that are literally these freaking bad actors. What's up, Doc? Onwards and upwards.